Hey friends, welcome back. Just pause this thing. Okay, we're back on the podcast, and I'm with Julie today. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Brian.
And we're going to do an experiment in negative psychoanalysis. So I have a desire. I wish to be negatively analyzed in public, and that's the problem with this session. So, what do you think about that, Julie? How do we do this?
Yeah, it is a problem because first, there is no established practice, and there hopefully won't ever be established practice, negative practice of negative psychoanalysis. But I feel that it's problematic that it's public. Uh, First of all, it should not serve as an example of how it should be done because there
Mhm.
is a space of exploration. Nobody knows. Nobody's supposed to know how it's done. But it feels that practicing publicly loses something because it's still there is a moment of intimacy which is lost once it's public or once it's even if it's recorded. You're not supposed to. That's the way I feel. It's not. I'm saying that it's supposed to be like that. Something is lost when you are recording it. Maybe because you're preserving it. Maybe and ideally, maybe there is supposed to be nothing to preserve or
Mhm.
nothing to actually analyze, nothing to keep as a result of it. You only taking away. I'm trying to only take away um, everything. So if you delete it after it, or people forget it, it would be perfect.
Oh, maybe I'll delete it in like 30 days or something. Maybe I'll do something like that. So it's like
It still counts. Delete it now.
it's not good that I like have the power though. That's another aspect that's problematic. Is like I have the power whether or not to delete it. So I want to talk about like that, both of those things really bad, but also I'm curious, like, just so the audience knows, like you're not a hostage. I didn't force you to do this. So you're here. So like what do you think motivated you to do it despite the obvious problems?
Because I thought it might be still a negative practice, a negative psychoanalytic practice, but in a form of exploration, which, to be honest, substantial part of what I do is this exploration of psychoanalysis as such, of psychotherapy as such, of past experiences with psychotherapy, which is also self-reflection in a way to what extent we are psychologized in this culture and reflection on culture. Um, but the goal and plus on top of it, it's not plus, rather minus, it's the critical assessment of what is normally happening in therapeutic practices. And also I do provide some interpretations or some philosophical uh, suggest some philosophical interpretation, but I would rather uh, I tend to take away whatever I say, and I think there is a point in it, not to trying not to be someone who people can rely for interpretation or for expertise, not to be expert, like not be actually not someone who doesn't know, not like Lacanian who knows precisely by not knowing. That's the point. It's like doesn't completely work that way because if there is still something for psychoanalysts to do, not to know, it's still a form. It turns the form more easily in a form of knowledge. Um, well, this kind of sessions are also problematic because they might be perceived, and they are sometimes perceived as help, but
Mm.
and as interesting interpretation or something valuable. Some new dimensions open up, but still, I consider it the secondary product that's not supposed to happen ideally. It's rather a space where you have to lose it or not have to lose it, but the space that I'm cherishing is a space where this is lost. The space of loss, you can say.
Space of loss, yeah. And maybe we can explore the space of loss, bouncing off this idea of a critical assessment or reassessment of psychotherapy. So, my understanding of traditional psychoanalysis and psychotherapy is the problem of us doing it publicly would be Well, one thing, it's neutrality, right? Like there's a very important idea of in psychoanalysis about neutrality. Like you're supposed to be neutral as the analyst, and I'm supposed to project onto you my transference and fantasies. And because there's like random people in the room and I like know you and I've read your work, like my fantasies that I'm projecting onto you are not, they're very specific, you know, they already have associations. You're not able to be neutral. So like, how do you think, what would be a negative approach to this idea of like neutrality in psychotherapy?
What you described is rather Lacanian method, right?
Yeah.
Lacanian psychoanalysis, the way it's. I don't care that much about this, the transference and these techniques, because it's still a technique. The way you suggest idea of neutrality, I would maybe interpret it in a way that it's the loss of self. And even though I am neutral myself, quite neutral, and I think any person in a way has this neutrality as the core, it might be seen as a space of loss. Like when we open it up, it's shameful. So public making it public might serve the function of, it's shameful to expose
Uh-huh.
it, not knowing, or some personal details, or just wondering about yourself. Like this aspect might be you don't care that much about you as constituted individual, and you expose yourself in your questioning, or something that bothers you. For example, this
Yeah.
element, I'm neutral as the, even though I publish books and I have certain public individuality, but still is this individuality is problematic in terms that it's um, persona that doesn't know, that
Mm.
questions, that is not smart, doesn't know how to do things. So like I'm existing, but through it is quite neutral in this way.
Okay, that's interesting. But it's neutral, it's not as technique though. Like that would be your critique of like Lacanian neutrality, is that that's supposed to help me turn you into my mom or lover. And for you, it's less about technique and more about critique, technique and
I'm
critique.
not ready to call it technique, because calling it technique would mean losing the not knowing what to do to some extent. But if we call it a technique, for example, me laughing at everything because it's part of what I do unintentionally. This is just psychological thing. But it might be called a technique, just devaluing stuff randomly.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're doing the laughing thing, and I just noticed that like I laughed to like mirror you, but I don't think it's funny.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think it's funny too. That's the point. But it's funny because it doesn't funny because people reciprocate. It's even funny, which is the kind of absurdity. But on the other hand, who considers what is funny? It's your body that reacts to. So
Yeah.
even if it's an appropriate reaction, physiological reaction in both me and you, it might be actually appropriate in its inappropriateness.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I think, yeah, appropriate in its inappropriateness. I wonder if that's kind of like what this session is too, is if it could be appropriate in its inappropriateness. Because like I think you're right about, well, I don't know if you're right, but something you said seemed to track with me, is like this feels like this project that this session is a part of feels like Death Drive to me. Like I'm trying to get canceled, or I'm trying to be ashamed. I'm trying to destroy myself, and my reputation and my career maybe, and my relationships. And that's kind of curious. Like, what would be the motivation behind that? I want to do it though.
Well done. Yeah, talking about desk drive as a main thing in the session is important because that would be not because, but it's interestingly, I think, opposite to conventional, not only Freudian psychoanalysis, practical psychoanalysis, and not only Lacanian, but in general, opposite to psychotherapy, because they would try to get rid of it. at least the way they, if they keep the concept, the way they conceptualize it, they would see it as an obstacle getting you, but not something you have to not cherish, at least admit. And for me, the way I would rather conceptualize test drive, it is what is happening in a session, and what is happening in a person. But I have strange comprehension of a test drive, which is closer to Sabine Spielrein than to Freud comprehension. And unlike Sabine Spielrein, if she would have her own practice, who actually invented the concept of the death drive or death instinct, unfortunately, the psychoanalysis that she practiced was Freudian psychoanalysis, like really following the technique to be considered professional. And I wonder how her actual psychoanalysis would look like, the one that perceives the death drive first as intersocial, and second, more connected with love, in this way, intersocial, and then for Freud, and as a basic principle that drives humans. But unfortunately, we don't know what would it be. One need to invent it. The other practice that is close to, I think, what I'm trying to do is Beyond's practice, the way he thought about it, meaning there's the ability, the negative capability. He takes a term from Keats, the poet. Negative capability mean that, well, for him, it's very important capability, meaning that we rather cherish space of unknowing, resisting knowledge, space of non-knowledge, space of void, and the session of analyst and analysant would be invitation of this space of on developing of negative capability, resisting feeling anxiety of not knowing. And it would also be for Beyond, though, it was that as a result of this, you arrive to kind of some interesting knowledge, some new knowledge. Is still quite positive in this way, getting something out of it through this nothingness. And for me, it would just stay with this knowledge of this non-knowledge, rather, which is frustrating. Like this domain that it's open up. And unlike any conventional psychotherapy, I think, and psychoanalysis, including Lacanian psychoanalysis, it would be about knowledge, getting knowledge. Analysis, the very word presupposes that you get knowledge, and this kind of in Beyond interpretation, if you stop it until you get something, some kind of new knowledge, it would be rather about love, not knowledge, or bond, something like it. When you resign knowledge, it's not about knowledge. You don't hold on to interpretations, to knowledge. The space of loss, and this is how it's space of the death drive, which can be seen as love.
That's interesting. So you said the void is frustrating. I get what you're saying, but I'm more afraid. I have more fear that would come up. And I'm thinking about this one thing I wanted to talk to you about, this situation I'm dealing with right now. I'm on something I call the honesty campaign. And what happened was I first told my real, like, not that you're, yeah, I would say my real therapist, my actual analyst, that I'm in love with her. And it was very hard for me to do because I was like scared of it. And the problem was that after, and the neutrality is very scary because I don't actually know what she thinks, you know? I don't, and so there's this gap, because there's like a soothing that happens, like, okay, I'm not going to end the session. I'm not going to reveal to you that I'm disgusted or horny or anything. I'm not going to reveal anything. So there's a gap between us. And that I liked doing it though. I liked it. I felt fear about doing it, but I liked it because it released energy and then I felt creative. And So I started telling a bunch of other people in my life truth. Whatever, I don't know if it's quite truth, but like honesty. I was like, I'm angry right now. So the two big ones that are taboo for me are anger and sexual attraction. So if I'm feeling those, I'm saying it more. And the problem with this is people react to that in ways that are unpredictable. Sometimes they act positively, sometimes negatively, sometimes they're like, I need to think about this. Um, and it's scary. I feel, and I'm kind of parsing that as like a void moment, like in between the time I say I'm angry or I'm attracted to you and the time that they give me feedback about that. Sometimes people say something like, okay, I need to like go away from you and think about this. And then that space in between is absolutely horrifying to me. That's the association I had to your Spielreinian, like this invention I want to do with you about the inventing Spielreinian practice. Um, because there's something about love and there's something about love and connection that is just fundamentally, there's a lot of void there. There's a lot of space where I don't know. And I'm kind of scared of that, to be honest. I don't feel a lot of frustration about it, but I feel fear.
I think that psychoanalysts are the easiest one to love,
Hmm.
because of this neutrality. And they, in conventional psychoanalysis, it would be cold transference, and it would be analyzed, and you will reveal something about yourself, and you'll probably improve yourself and know more about yourself. But like this mechanism technique, I would say rather that it reveals nothing. Psychoanalyst is easy to love because it's a place of nothingness. It's not that you love yourself, but this is love is encountering nothing, like this rupture, the and even when person is not saying anything about themselves, this nothingness is what they actually are. So psychoanalyst, paradoxically, by being neutral, is real. It's nothing, and you feel reciprocate through revealing maybe this nothingness in you, and this is called love. Also, love is problematically, and it comes with fear, and because you're losing yourself,
Mhm.
according to Sabine Spielrein. But love is seen normally as a feeling within individual, your desire, and you might have a physical manifestation of it. And it comes from Freud, one of the first one who conceptualized the sexual desire and love as within individual drive that needs to be, or desire that needs to be satisfied. It's about you in this conceptualization. It's about you and your desire to obtain stuff and kind of possess it.
Mhm.
And it's embarrassing this way. But in Sabine Spielrein, if you comprehend it differently, in Sabine Spielrein comprehension, love would be rather not in the individual as the desire to obtain, to possess. It would be in between space, which is the space of destruction of you and of your analyst, of nothingness, where you encounter each other, or the loss of you renounce yourself kind of in this space of where no one existed, just unity, but at the same time, like not 1+1 unity, rather the destruction of ones, and unity in this through destruction. So, and in this way, if psychoanalytic session is this kind of stuff, uh, essentially, then it hurts, but this is what love is. It hurts. There is never, I think, the happy love
Mhm.
that ends up in relationship. It's always loss. It's exist by one losing it, once encountering it. So I'd rather maybe access to this space, where you're scared. According to Spielrein, there is also when feeling of disgust with the object of love. It's maybe from the female side, but also when you discuss it with yourself, and at the same time you feel a fear, but you're brave enough to expose you as nothingness,
Mhm.
to to be honest about it. And the thing is that I'm not saying that this process, that psychoanalysis, the way psychoanalytic session might be seen from this perspective, kind of perverted conventional terms. I'm not saying it makes people better, doing it. I'm not saying that it makes world better. Just something happening. Uh, Maybe it's important to give the space to this process. The problem that one person is paying for this for some reason, and the other is that's another problem of that kind of uh, deprives it of something that I would want it to be, maybe this kind of space of where people encounter themselves as nothingness, which might be called love.
Hmm. So then people would just everyone go to your Patreon and then you can just get really rich and do it for free. Is that the idea?
I was thinking, well, Freud, I have several justification why I'm still taking money for it. First, that I just need money, and it's like kind of charity for now. But then I thought, once I won't need money, uh, and because Freud claims that it only works when people pay, it
Hmm.
gives it value to
Hmm.
something that doesn't initially have value, and the more it costs, apparently, the more they value it. But also, if it works that way, people can pay to each other. You pay same amount to the other person. I'm not ready for it yet, but it's just the idea for the future. But it is problematic. And the other way to justify it is that it feels embarrassing for me because it contradicts the idea, and it might feel embarrassing for it's also this thing of exposing your embarrassing side of needing money.
Yeah. Yeah. So you feel embarrassed about needing money. And then there's like yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. Um, I wanted to ask you about maybe we could look at ethics because the money is coming up, and then we also talked about like you're like participating in my death drive and killing me in my relationships by being on this podcast, and so there's like ethical questions about that. And I think I told you in a private session about my ethics. I'm working on this ethical thing called ethical hedonism. And this is the idea that it's why I'm so attracted to negative psychoanalysis and like I want to participate in it is because it's pointless. So like I accept a lot of Buddhism, like the Buddha, that guy. Um, you may have heard of him. It looks like this. This is a statue. Um, I haven't seen a picture. I'm not sure if that's what he actually looked like, but um, he has this interesting idea about suffering, like life being fundamentally about suffering, right? Like craving and aversion, like either wanting something or not wanting something. And that's like the root of suffering. And then there's an ethical, and so that's like almost like a metaphysics or something um, of desire, which I find very fascinating, which I largely accept. And I like his method. It's very phenomenological and clear to me, but I do have a different ethics, which is hedonistic. So that my understanding, and this is like rudimentary, I'm not like a scholar or anything, but my understanding is like you're supposed to not desire and try to bracket desires and like meditate and stuff like that, and like go into a monastery and like detach from the world. And my approach to this is to participate like with the knowledge that it's futile. So to do hedonism, and it's ethical because I know it would not be ethical if there was a delusion that I would get something from this. But it is ethical because I know that it's pointless and do it anyways. So that's like sex, relationships, negative psychoanalysis, um, anything really, anything in samsara.
Why is it called hedonism that if you're not getting enjoyment out of it?
Wait, say again? I missed it.
Why is it hedonism then if you're not getting enjoyment?
Well, because I think it is enjoyment. I think it feels good, but enjoyment is suffering. I think that's like on a sensory level, like I'm having fun right now. I like talking to you for some reason. I don't know why. There's something I like, and so it's pleasurable. And then I'll be sad when we're done. I'll be like, oh, Julie probably won't talk to me for like another month. Um, and then I'll be sad or never again. And that's like that. So the Buddha, I think, is saying just ignore that structure. Just forget about Julie and go meditate, be a bodhisattva. And I don't mean to straw man Buddhism either, or straw person. Sorry, straw person. Political correctness is important. Um, yeah, but I just want to have the conversation. And so that's hedonism to me. And then I actually pretend to like the sadness. Like I'll pine after you and become obsessive, and I'll just feel what that's like. Um, yeah, and try not to like stalk you or send you a bunch of messages. So that's what I do. That's why I think it's hedonistic.
So it's like negative hedonism, which I would question the term,
Yeah, yeah.
but negative psychoanalysis is not less problematic, to be honest. With Buddhism, it actually has influence on psychoanalysis through Schopenhauer, right? This
Huh?
idea, basically, some extent, Freud can be seen as the westernized through Schopenhauer Buddhism in its strange form, when there is this will,
Mhm.
which causes suffering, inevitable. There is no salvation from the suffering, but I'm not sure how pleasure plays here. But the basic response, normally, I think, for encountering this, well, hedonism as such in culture, is encountering this principle, like there is nothing left, there is no salvation. At least one can get some pleasure, uh, even though it presupposes the dialectics of pleasure and pain. Fine, it's like I like this part to the extent that it renounces it salvation, the idea of salvation, like at least something, and the understanding of the dialectics that suffering is also always there, even if it's pleasurable sometimes. But so the way I would, and traditionally psychoanalysis, conventionally, it would see the dialectics of pleasure and pain. And Todd McGowan would write, for example, that the death drive is the mechanism that makes pleasure possible. Pleasure always
Mhm.
includes pain or death drive. And this is how he claims we can create affordable pleasure through accepting the mechanism of a death drive. Uh, I would say that I would try to resist this logic and only see it as suffering. And pleasure, I would see within the context of suffering as some rest from it. Well, I wouldn't consider it at all, because it's not. I'm resisting. It's my philosophical ascetic position of not trying to see it in people. It's what I'm practicing. It's like the
Yeah.
honesty policy, but non-pleasure honesty. Even if there is pleasure, I would rather comprehend it as a form of pain. Just this is how I can tolerate people better.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, but and from this perspective, um, analyzing you from this perspective, or anyone else who would uh, talk about hedonism, not this kind of hedonism, like more normal version.
Mhm.
I would still see it as suffering underneath it.
Mhm.
And through this, I would more easily accept the person, maybe. Um, at the same time, I wouldn't impose this perspective on others. I would try not to, but just exercising it. And partially negative session is this kind of exercise through comprehending the negative side and seeing it as a basic side. Even of the best things, the best, most positive things like happiness, still seen, being in a space where negative is seen as uh, more fundamental one.
Mhm. Yeah, and that makes sense because the problem with pleasure being even even the dialectic of pleasure and pain being being a thing, is because like if we're trying to be in the field in between us, the negative space, um, yeah, like if pleasure becomes a focus, that objectifies the other person and subjectivizes me, you become an object of my pleasure, and then we've lost the field, and I'm living um, as a person seeking pleasure. It's pleasure seeking. And what I'm trying to do with ethical hedonism is just to be possessed by that drive for pleasure and just like be thrown around the world. And then hopefully sometimes I'll pop out into negative space randomly through like glitches. Um, that's kind of my way of operating right now because I just find that resisting, I'm just so driven by my pleasure seeking that I just find it more pragmatic to follow it instead of renouncing pleasure. And it is an obstacle, but I also think renunciation would be an obstacle to negative practice. So I just feel like it's just pragmatic to just be pleasure seeking, even though it's not. It's an obstacle to negative space, but that's okay because there will always be obstacles, and pleasure just feels like I don't know. It's just I don't know. I just want to do it. Probably just for pure base sensory satisfaction, like a chemical thing.
From my perspective, I just see it as the manifestation of individualized manifestation of despair, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's no matter how you mention and justify it. In German, I still see it as the opposite, but that's my thing. Do you want to talk about narcissism
Yeah,
and want it to be embarrassing enough for you and for me?
yeah.
Um, the other problem with the conventional therapy is that it's narcissistic. I don't like the word. It's problematic for many reasons, I don't think. And conventional term in psychology and in psychoanalysis, it exposes that there are no actually narcissism. There is whole thing under it that it's opposite to it, like the fear of not having yourself. So it's kind of narcissism at the same time the opposite, trying to cover the opposite. But still, if we stick with the term, even though it's quite problematic, psychotherapeutic sessions, as it is, which I don't like about it, is that it's still talking about someone and you helping in the narcissism of creating or exploring themselves. That's why people pay, basically. Um, but there's something that I don't like about it because it's still this exploration of self, creating self is still too attached to self, and even in a negative way, which conventional psychoanalysis and negative therapy kind of explores sometimes. So brings up where you say something about yourself that you're ashamed of, or you expose yourself in a negative way. It's still narcissistic, it's still this creation of
Mhm.
um, but it's so what you're saying with your concept of like your approach to this exposing yourself, exploring yourself, trying to construct your identity. For me, either and for the public, to like and not to like at the same time. This kind of in a position that you're ashamed at the same time smart, something like this, like giving it and take it away. This is I find problematic, but this is basically what I'm doing too, maybe in a different style. But um, at the same time, talking about myself and but saying that I'm not smart or something like that. Explaining what is negative therapy, but at the same time not knowing. Then recording it for the public, but at the same time saying that we should not record it for the public. In Russian pop psychology, I was writing about it somewhere. There is a term queen of shit. The when person talks about themselves, they're the main person, but in a negative way. But it's all about them. I was using it as the metaphor for human being as such in relation to animals, for example. But very nicely describes what I am. And well, there is still, maybe nice term, because there is still queen in there, even though it subverts. But that's the problematic side, and I would love to get rid of it. But from both people I'm working with and myself, but I'm not sure what will remain from the. Well, it's easy in a way, because you just have to stop talking and shut up the other person somehow, like make them stop talking, and or just leave as this way of ending a session. But then it's going to be same as before, no space of negation. Just always problematic with negation. It needs something to negate, and it doesn't work independently of it. You need something to destroy in order to destroy. But there is no but. That's just it. It doesn't work.
Well, yeah, narcissism. I think it's insightful. I like this. It resonates. Like, I think the opposite of or the complex, a narcissistic complex is shame and glory for me. So there's shame and there's glory. And then the narcissist, when we're in our narcissism, it's like overly attached to glory, but repressed is the shame. Like, I cannot be loved. And that's why there's an inability to empathize with others, because what I'm ashamed of you could not empathize with. You could not, in my mind, like, so that's hidden, and it turns off the empathy, which is unfortunate. And then we have the queen of shit term, which is brilliant. I really like this. And then I wanted to ask, I was wondering into the theoretical, like what you think of like theology and mysticism, because there's maybe some resources there with like negative theology, and what do they call it? Apophatic and cataphatic. I don't know which one is which, but one is positive and one is negative. And so like some mystics like Meister Eckhart will say like their way, you can't know God. So God cannot be known, because as a time-bound, contingent, historical being, like how could you know the absolute? That would be ridiculous. And so he like does negative theology practice, which is don't be a human, strip away the human, and then you can be more like God kind of progressively. So it's kind of a negative practice. And then I think it's apophatic.
But
Do you know this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I mean,
Yeah, but you would like try to feel love, you try to feel nice things in that one. And I assume you would hate that. Um, sorry for assuming, but yeah. What do you think that's a resource? Is that like a language and like a regime you're interested in at all?
theology is interesting, and an interesting relation in psychoanalysis. Freud, starting with Freud rejecting
Yeah.
anything religious as primitive, but actually one could say psychoanalysis is functioning as religion, given the scientific or kind of conceptual theoretical substitute in some way of coordinates for contemporary humans. And in this negative psychoanalysis that I try to dedicate myself to, it would be maybe similar to with me renouncing religion as offering salvation, and renouncing psychoanalysis as offering substitute of salvation. I
Yeah.
would partially accept psychoanalysis in its negative form that doesn't offer salvation genuinely, and maybe theology, religion that subverts itself without offering religion, without offering salvation, but at the same time, the core of everything is the opposite of what it appears. And this apophatic theology, to some extent, it reveals the negative theology, like Meister Eckhart. It to some extent it reveals this negative side of it, because you cannot know God is someone you cannot know. There is nothing you can do to. It takes away narcissism. I might use the contemporary term. It takes away the hope for salvation, that there is some process, something you can follow. At the same time, it proclaims that the non-knowledge, so kind of contradicts itself. And beyond in this way might be called apophatic psychoanalyst, was his space of, was his and mystic was his letter O, that is like mythical sign for the void and nothingness that one invites, creates the space for it by denying, negating oneself or something like that. It can be seen as apophatic, but the problem with it is that, at least in its profane interpretation, apophatic still offers in exchange like higher level knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It will offer something that you're not, so, or it offers salvation through absurd. So genuinely apophatic, and genuinely negative without reaching the positive through the negative, I would accept it, but not in the profane comprehension that it creates a space for some new form of knowledge through getting rid of the conventional form of knowledge. Just no knowledge, no improvement, and no salvation.
Yeah. So the problem is that there's an idea through negative practice that you would get something. You would get union with God. Traditionally, is the idea. You want union with God, the beatific vision, heaven, salvation, etc., etc., etc. And that would be problematic for negative practice, because it's basically negative practice as a means to an end, as opposed to an end in of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, the union with God. If we substitute God with nothingness, or the way some would claim the death of God, the loss of God. Just my problem is why you need to say God, add God, if it's just a loss. Then it might work, but so instead of reaching God or reaching salvation, you just maybe embrace the absence of God or the absence of salvation, just the loss itself. But it's also a problematic position, because there is something you can do, like embrace it. So what? Like your life will improve now, or you will be sad, but life is going to be livable. It's still problematic, because it's the end point, saying what to do, embracing. And I would say that this is problematic. Just admitting that it's problematic, like a real queen of shit.
Yeah, speaking of the queen of shit, like I want to, since you let me help to experiment with this in the exploration, I feel that it's actually, I feel pretty strongly that I want to reject, completely critique apophatic mysticism, and the whole edifice of Western theology. Like, even though people are doing interesting things with it, um, like death of God theology and process theology, I think are interesting, but I actually don't like them, because I think we need, especially for a Spielreinian approach to therapy or analysis, psychoanalysis, there has to be the return of the succession myth. So her text is death as a cause of coming into being. That's one translation in English. And so I think what this points to is a deeper mythic structure that monotheism has rejected, which is a cyclical rebirth. And so what's interesting about monotheism, especially Christianity, as I understand it, is Yahweh wins. That's very important. Like Lucifer loses and goes to hell. In a lot of different myth, there's succession, like Greek, Mesopotamian. It's God is contingent. And so I think if God is contingent, it's okay to have God in the picture. In negative practice, there can be gods, there can be a Gnostic God. It's just not transcendental, and it's contingent. And I think that's very interesting. I think that is the structure that needs to be retained. And it's like the king in Mesopotamia, as far as I know, I'm not like an anthropologist or anything, but he would have sex with an avatar of Inyana, and they would kill him. And that would that's a symbolic image of the crops growing. I think that's good. I think that's a good structure. I think that is better than Christianity or monotheism. And I think underlying something that's celebrating the goddess mythology more. cyclical is more helpful than these dudes who are doing mysticism. That's my take. What do you think?
From this perspective, I would reject apophatic theology and negative theology too, because
Yeah.
again, in this profane reading, where it's still a progress, you're progressing somewhere in time, even through negation of uh, normal knowledge, but it's still in order to attain some kind of higher type of knowledge, or non-knowledge as a higher type of knowledge. It's still a progress. It's a linear time. And Christianity, even apophatic Christianity, can be accused, and this is what I wouldn't like. But at the same time, if Christianity or negative theology honestly reject itself, it encounters it, like the whole thing is negated. But it's quite rare. More, what is more common is just this progress through negation.
Yeah.
And I would be closer, rather, in my comprehension of what I cherish. Sabine Spielrein, what she reveals, and
Yeah.
what comes before, what Kristeva calls women time, the time of repetition.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know why it's women's, but it's more natural, more fundamental time. Unlike, I assume, men's time, it's a time of progress. So it's a time where the progress, improvements, if not a salvation, some kind of movement to improvement, some form of salvation is possible. But according to Kristeva and for Sabine Spieler, in the dimension of repetition is more fundamental, and they both connected with feminine something dimension of the mother.
Yeah.
And this is a space for me. It's a space of loss, space where you and the dark space. Maybe more Lucifer would
Yeah.
be about this dimension where you never win, where just the repetition. And for Spielrein, it's coincidence of destruction and creation, or death and creation. It's never that, in linear time, after destruction, after death, there comes creation or generation as something that overcomes it, as something that the resurrection of a dead one, for example, a phoenix. But the thing is that they are simultaneously both. That destruction is a creation, but at the same time, it's destruction all the way. It's like this repetition. So the space of which is the space of death, and there is fundamentally nothing else except for this creative space of death. It never gets overcome. It's just eternal repetition of failure, one could say. For Spielrein, I like your image more than the one that was the sex and the murder. Her
Yeah.
image is just pregnancy. When pregnancy and giving birth to a child is normally as a symbol of creation of new life, but at the same time is the destruction of a body of the mother that new life never compensates for. It's just the result of it. And she would use, for some reason, Nietzsche as the image of a mother who, or Zarathustra, who looks into himself, encounters his mother, the absence of himself, like his grave and the womb of his mother at the same time. And through this, he becomes a mother. So through touching the nothingness, destruction of yourself, nothingness that you are, you become a mother. And it repeats all over again, like Russian matryoshka, but even worse, like eternal one. And there is no actual matryoshka, this doll. It's always the only environment for the next one, and comes to eternity. And to reveal her true essence is to destroy her, something like it.
Yes. I think that's really interesting. I want to explore that further. I think the time of the mother, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is I think that it's a trap. Like, I do wonder about, maybe we could talk a little bit about gender, because I think that so I think a lot about cycles. And yeah, the meme, the idea is that like women are more in touch with cycles because there's like a biological reminder for, during menstruation, and there's some kind of lunar connection to cycles. I do believe another person I had on the channel was telling me this, and I think this is why the monotheists, they don't want you to have sex. They say no sex, because she was telling me that for men, there is a cycle with testosterone, but it's more solar in the sense that it rises to a peak and then you release like the sun, it rises to a peak. That's like the erection. And then there's an ejaculation and then testosterone down cycle. And this is solar, like a day clock. And I thought that was interesting symbolism. However, there is like one exception, which is that if I see graphic sexual or violent imagery, I'll ratchet up to the top of the cycle really quickly. Yeah, so that was her interpretation of cycles and men. So I think that's interesting. Like I do think there is a ability to think cyclically and repetition with repetition beyond the genders, but we need to have sex more or see more violent imagery or something. Yeah, that's my idea.
What concerns me and idea that I would like to develop in the future is without hopefully going into any mysticism of women and cycles and just sure is the theory of PMS as the depressive realism.
Ooh, that's
Because
interesting.
we normally think that we normally in therapeutic culture, and it's well known for feminists that it's male centered and the ideal human being is very stable without those cycles.
Right.
And females subject are constituted as based on male model, which is maybe more stable, it's different, less visible cycles, psychological especially, and like the whole medicalization of female issues, including depression, would try to make her more like men, which means they would comprehend PMS as the deviation of who she actually is, and women would blame for the depression, for example, or the fact that they tend to cry for it just temporary, it's not me, it's PMS.
Yeah.
But because they can do the other way around, like it can be actually, why is the PMS not you, and the other parts of the cycle where you're more stable is you? Why is it necessary? And the other thing is the depressive realism. I'm trying to maybe develop more feminist version of it, because depressive realism, which claims that depression is adequate comprehension of the world, it's based off a male model when the male is the one who is depressed and it makes him adequate, and female would openly be seen women as more cheerful, meaning less smart traditionally.
Yeah.
And based on this model, PMS, when they're depressed, cry for no reason, like all these symptoms would be seen as a deviation. Women, are cheerful in nature, just something is wrong with them over the certain days of a cycle, but why not the other way around when PMS is actually depressive realism? It's even more depressive than male version of depressive realism, because they kind of claim that they get knowledge out of depression, they get real comprehension of the world, and it hurts them. In PMS, it just hurts you and you don't get knowledge, it's just nothing more negative. And in this way, this kind of being more in touch with the world and maybe being more female kind of in this way, that it hurts, plus it doesn't make sense, like it's more absurdity in it. So I would try to develop this kind of model of depressive realism, which is more feminist or less feminist. I don't know.
That's interesting. I'm glad you're talking about this, the PMS. It's very insightful to me. One thing I noticed about my practice is there's something in the US called PMDD,
Oh,
post-menstrual depressive disorder,
yeah.
PMDD. And actually, I'm like a dude. I present that way and act like that. And I see quite a lot of people they specifically think of me to come to. And I always find that so intriguing. Because I wonder if I never thought of it like this, but I wonder if they think like as a man, I can help them be stable, and more stable. And I want to think about that more. And I love this idea because I hadn't thought about this, Julie. I despise balance. Balance, it's like I'm a Libra too in the tropical system of astrology. I was born in October, and so people think I'm balanced. But the thing about Libras is we'd want to unbalance, like, because you like want to go to each side, fill one side. And so it's like I've been accused of being bipolar, up and down, and no, I don't like balance, and that's kind of a subversive idea, because balance, like, this is coming out of like Aristotle, right? Like, this is a very deep idea that we're supposed to be balanced. Um, and I don't know about that. Maybe sometimes no. Um, Anyways, I was thinking as you were talking, I think this is a very deep insight, and I hope you develop your work on PMS, so I can read it.
During PMS, maybe.
I'm in PMS.
It's,
Awesome.
it's interesting that you mentioned that women or people, just women, might look for more balance, more stability in men, and in the relationship too. Simone de Beauvoir would write in her first philosophical feminism book that woman looks for salvation in man. This traditional heterosexual relationship is when man is substitute. Or I don't know who is substitute. The God is substitute for a man that who's supposed to save you, the savior you can rely on, or the God is substitute of that one of them. Doesn't matter. But this form of looking for salvation in man, and not never like the death of a man, the death of a God is equal here to the death of the man. You fail, and God is better version because it's imaginary. But with the man, you can actually feel the failure, that salvation never comes. Even if you're in a successful relationship, like, it still works. It's through the acceptance maybe of the failure, that there is no one to save you. Even if you are in a relationship, even if you are supported, it's like the still doesn't work as this salvation. And in the therapy, it's all also, it might give you the illusion of salvation, but ideally maybe it's just disrupts the hope of looking for salvations. It's sad story ultimately of
Mhm.
providing illusion and never actually getting it.
Do you know the term white knight? So it's a meme in America. I don't know. It's kind of Anglo, but it's this idea of, on the internet, if there's a woman in an argument, men will come to help her out, like on Twitter, as a way to, like, ingratiate themselves to her and defend her, like the white knight. And since I want to mix this metaphor with the queen of shit, like I want to be like a knight of shit. That's my goal. I'm hoping I'll convince you to be like, let me be a knight of shit, and then it'll fail, but I can like try. So just think about it. It's an offer, and look up the meaning of like white knight, because like, yeah, I feel like that's what I want right now. I want to be like riding off into the distance with a mission from you, like
The
go
mission
off
is
a
not
cliff.
to have a mission.
Yeah, like get out of here, go away. That's very interesting. So I'll stay with that image and let you know how it goes.
The
Okay.
guy goes,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
This is the cut. This is the Lacanian end of the section on the Knight of Shit point. So, Julie, you've been very gracious with your time. Haven't done anything for me at all. This was complete waste. Thank you. Um, where
Really,
where can we help you? How can we help you? Or how can we not help? What can we do if we're like want to be depressed more? The audience, how can they be more depressed? And
you can give me money on my Patreon, so I'll feel ashamed of accepting.
yeah, and help embarrass Julie more and tell her I sent you, so I can be embarrassed, and she'll be more likely to ignore me, which would be good.
Thank
Um, Bye, Julie. Thank you.
you. Bye. Thank you.